This interview, which is about angels and demons, was conducted by Dr. Cyndi Parker for the Context Matters podcast. She interviewed me, and she very graciously offered to let me publish the interview right here on my YouTube channel. Enjoy.
Father Andrew, thank you so much for being on this podcast. And I know you are wildly busy, and I just appreciate this time. I've really been looking forward to this particular conversation because the last time we talked, it was 2020. Shortly after we talked, you started a podcast that is called The Lord of Spirits with your very good friend, Father Stephen DeYoung. And so I've just been eagerly anticipating being able to talk about what you did in 200 hours worth of conversations.
Or
Let's just
more.
do a short synopsis here.
Yeah, yeah, no problem.
Well, and first, because this is Context Matters, and I always start with a bit of contextual information about us. And some of that you already told us the first time you were here. But one of the things I didn't remember, well, you had talked about growing up in an evangelical missionary family,
That's
living
right.
geographically all over the place.
Yep. Yep.
And then only in college, I think, is when you started getting into like English language, literature, your interest in religion. But one of the things I didn't remember, and I don't know if you just didn't share it or not, was that you worked as a professional theater technician.
That's right, for 10 years.
Yeah, that is so fascinating to me. And I wonder now that you're in this chief content officer position with Ancient Faith Ministries, I wonder if this is this beautiful coalition of so many of your interests. You're doing technical things, you do lights, cameras, microphones, and ancient history and religion all rolled into one.
Yeah. So, I mean, there are a number of the skills that I learned doing theater. I had to kind of, you know, dust those off a little bit, doing stuff for Ancient Faith Ministries. I kind of relearned a little bit how to do audio mixing, and yeah, I mean, I'm not doing lighting design like I did in theater. You know, there's no here in my studio. I don't have lights hanging from the ceiling that are shining on my face right now. Um,
Yet.
but yet, there we go. That's right. No, no, there's a line. I'm not going to cross it. Um, but yeah, you know, it's funny because even when I was serving as a parish priest, I felt that my time in theater actually helped to prepare me for that on some
Hmm.
level. So part of it was that being a pastor means dealing with a lot of volunteers and doing theater, whether you're doing it professionally or not, you're often dealing with volunteers or people with lower levels of personal stake. And so that was actually very, very helpful, particularly because I was working at a roadhouse where we had different shows coming in, often several per week. So there was always new people and always having to deal with different situations and dealing with what we like to call, there's problem solvers and then there's problem presenters. And so in church work, there's definitely both of those as well. And but also a sense of in theater, you're putting on a show so that people have a particular experience. In a liturgical Christian setting, it's not a show, it's for real. And yet, still a sense of decorum and timing and aesthetics and symmetry. All of that is very, very present in what it is that we do. It's definitely not lights, camera, action in the Orthodox Church, the way, frankly, it is in a lot of evangelical churches. But that sense of kind of a liturgical drama is very present.
Yeah,
But there is definitely a big difference between we're pretending so that we can entertain everyone
right.
versus okay, this is for real, and we're actually in the presence of the living God and putting food on His table as a ritual sacrifice. But yeah, so those things. I was using a number of those skills and that sensibility and instincts and so forth that I developed in theater as a parish priest. Of course, still continuing to serve as a parish priest, but I'm not as a priest, but I'm not a pastor anymore. But there's another side to all these theatrical skills that I'm now using, being a full-time media guy. So yeah, so here I am. It's the weird confluence of the truly ancient and the extremely up to date.
Right. It's so beautiful. I really love it. And I love I mean, I attend a liturgical church, and so one of the things I do love about it, and again, like you're saying, it's not a show that's being put on, but it really is very much engaging the aesthetics of this embodiment in different ways.
Yeah,
So smells and sounds and feeling and our own embodiment of sitting and standing, which can just be so beautiful in what the
exactly.
liturgy is doing.
Yep,
Yeah.
exactly.
Okay, well, I would love to talk about the Lord of Spirits. So, in that podcast that you did with Father Stephen DeYoung, you took on questions that are related to what is spiritual reality like? How do we engage with it well? How do we permeate everyday life with spiritual presence? And I'd love first, before we actually go into some of those questions, I'd love to hear your take on why that particular podcast was so wildly popular that
Yeah,
you went for, is it 3 years, more than three
no, it's
years?
been 5 years now. We just
Oh,
celebrated our fifth anniversary. So we
oh,
did
it
episode.
continues. I thought you
Oh,
went 3 years and stopped with the
no, no,
publishing of
no,
your book.
no, no. Yeah, it continues. We still, in fact, we're about to have our second Lord of Spirits conference. When we're recording, we're about to have our second Lord of Spirits conference here in just a few weeks. So yeah, it continues. We've got 123, 124 episodes now. So it's hundreds of hours
Yeah.
of material. Yeah, we estimate now we have about between 50 and 60,000 monthly listeners.
Whoa.
Yeah, yeah. So there's a big chunk of them on YouTube where they don't get to see our faces. It's just the audio being broadcast. But also we have a lot on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, on our own Ancient Faith Radio app. Yeah, it's astonishing to me how it is that this podcast, which is so unlikely, I think, to be appealing to people. And the reason why I think it's so unlikely, so when we came up with the idea back in mid 2020, I went to the then CEO of Ancient Faith Ministries and I said, okay, I've got this idea for a podcast, for a live show. I have a friend who's a biblical scholar and he's been doing this really interesting stuff on his blog, the Whole Counsel of God blog. Um, and yet I'm looking at the stats and it's getting like very little attention. It's amazing stuff, amazing work he's doing, but it's getting very, very little attention. And I would love to see what it would be like to kind of present this in a way that people could connect with. And so he said, "Well, what exactly would it be about?" I said, "Well, we're going to start out talking about angels and demons and the unseen world and ancient history and what was ancient religion really like and so forth." And really digging deep, deep, deep into the linguistic side of the Bible. And he said, that seems kind of niche. Do you think anybody would listen to that? And I said, I don't know. I have no idea, but it just sounds so fun. And he said, let's do it. Let's do it. And so we started that September of 2020. And we watched the stats just pile up and pile up. We were adding like 1,000 new listeners every month, and it just kept going and going. And then when we did our first conference 2 years ago, it sold completely out. It sold completely out again this year. And now we have multiple, between him and we have multiple books that are connected to the podcast. And there's no signs of it abating in terms of people requesting it. I don't know when the podcast will end. It's really kind of up to him because he's the actual biblical scholar between the two of us. And so when he feels like he's done saying what he wants to say, it will be over. But I asked him earlier this year if we were going to, end anytime soon. He says, "I'm not really feeling quitty." That's how he put it. So so here we are. We continue to do it twice a month, and it airs live, and then a few days later, the edited version comes out. And it's just nuts. I mean, it goes on. It is still remains so unlikely. The average episode now is 3 hours long. I
Oh,
sit in this chair
goodness.
for 3 hours, and late at night, and but people we get usually, I don't know, 150 people are there tuning in live or so, and then we watch the stats just spike over the next few days after it gets out into the podcast feed. And I mean, it was the same CEO who said that seems a little niche, who then after a couple of years came to me and said, we need a book called The Lord of Spirits. I said, well, what would be in it exactly? He says, I don't care what you put in it, but we need a book with that title. And so then I asked Father Steve, and I said, hey, do you want to co-write a book, because we've got this podcast together and it's being requested? He's like, yeah, you write it. I'll do a forward for you. And that's exactly what happened. So there is a Lord of Spirits book that came out in 2023, and it represents a snapshot of a lot of the framework for the show, but not even everything up to that point, because there's a lot of very specific stuff that we've covered, a lot of metaphysical things that I did not put into the book, like what exactly is a body in the ancient world, all this kind of stuff, which is very, very interesting. But I was just trying to kind of give, like I said, people a framework
Yeah.
to understand the Bible and the Orthodox tradition, and frankly, our current world. And I think that the reason that it took off the way that it did is really due to the pandemic, because for a long time there was, I think, Western culture has been developing disenchantment in people's lives. We
Mm.
become more and more isolated. We become more and more plugged into everything, he says in front of a microphone. And every kind of civic gathering, not just church, but every kind of civic gathering has been going down, down, down.
Yeah.
People don't even join the Kiwanis Club or the Rotary Club or whatever anymore. Like all this kind of stuff where people were doing stuff together has been going down. And then the pandemic hit and sent it all into 1,000 times speed. Everybody stay home. You're not allowed to go out and be with other people. And of course, there was every opinion about that. But nonetheless, no matter what anyone's opinion about it was, their life was very affected, either by them staying home or by all their friends and family staying home, by their church getting closed, by whatever, all that happened. And here, these two nerds sit behind a couple of microphones and say, let's talk about demons, everyone, and what's really going on in the world. And we were said, what is this, like coast to coast AM, but in an Orthodox context? You're like, this is weird stuff. When we're sitting behind microphone and saying giants are real, vampires are real, zombies are real. You just don't know the way that they're real. And and a lot of people within the Orthodox tradition were like, what is this? I've never heard this before. How is this
Yeah.
Orthodox? And we're just saying, there's this book called the Bible, and have you opened it up? There's some passages that maybe you haven't taken a close look at, or here's some hymns that mention these things that maybe you haven't taken a close look at. And I think that that's what has kind of driven its success. We do, of course, have a lot of Orthodox listeners, but we estimate that probably between 1/3 to maybe 40% are not Orthodox.
Yeah.
And some people have used it as a road into the Orthodox Church. Others have said this is enriching my Christian life wherever it is that they're doing it. So it's a weird motley crew, and I love it. I get to talk about dragons and giants on a regular basis with a straight face and tell people that all of this is real. And often they're shocked to discover exactly the way that it is real. So, yeah.
I can't wait to get into some of that a little bit more in just a moment. But I would say there is something about this unseen realm of angels and demons that is, even in our scientific minded modern world, is still very intriguing and mysterious. So I sometimes will throw out to people, some of my listeners, when I know I have certain guests coming on, and I'll be like, hey, what are some of the questions you have? And rarely do I have people who send in requests for very specific questions, except when I said we're talking angels and demons, flood of questions that have
Yeah.
come in. So I'm
Yeah.
going to interweave some of those
Okay.
into today's
All
conversation.
right. All right.
Now, you've mentioned this Orthodox Christian framework for the spiritual realm. Since I come from more of a Protestant tradition, lots of my listeners do. Could you just maybe point to what some of that difference would be?
Oh,
Maybe
wow.
what other ancient texts do you use that comes in the Orthodox Christian
Yeah.
tradition that maybe would not be familiar to a Protestant crowd?
Yeah, I mean, you're asking someone who's literally written a 400-page book about the differences between orthodoxy and everything else.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the question is sort of like, where do I begin? So you asked about ancient texts. I mean, the Orthodox Bible is mostly the same as the Protestant Bible. We've got a handful of other books that maybe Protestants would identify as being Catholic books, but it's simply these are the books that the ancient church was using, and a process of kind of sifting happened that eventually the Protestant world fell down on one side of in the late medieval, early Renaissance period. But what's interesting, if you look at those books like the Maccabees, the Tobit, stuff like this, and someone a committed Protestant reads through them, you're not going to see almost anything that you would have a problem with,
Right.
really. There's a couple moments in the Maccabees where you might squirm a little bit, where people are, for instance, praying for the dead, or the dead are praying for them. But other than that, like if you read the book of Tobit, there's nothing in there objectionable. I think. I don't know. I can't think of anything off the top of my head. To most Protestants, and then there's the wisdom literature, like we have the wisdom of Sirach and wisdom of Solomon, and these are just sort of like, more of like the stuff in the Proverbs, really. It's very, very similar. So that would not be the place that I would point people to and say, here's the difference. And a lot of that is because the Orthodox Church does not function like most of Protestantism, where there's the sense that this religion is derived from a book, derived from a set of texts, right? Rather, for us, the Bible is a very key and central part of a tradition that frankly predates the writing of those texts, and certainly predates the collection of those texts into what we would regard as
Mhm.
a scriptural canon, right? So for us, it comes out of the community. So you can't point at a particular text and say, here's the heresy, or here's the where the things turned left, or whatever it might be. That's not the way that our church functions. I mean, historically, the way that the Bible was recognized as being the Bible was that it was being read out loud in church services. That was really the criterion, And so for us, it's always remained in that context. That has always been the context within which we've listened to and interpreted the scriptures. So I think that would be one of the big uh, points of difference, I would say, for Protestants is not that we have a different Bible, although we do have a different Bible, but it's not much different, really.
Yeah.
It's not really
Right.
much different. But rather that the way that we understand what the Bible is and how it works and what its place in the Christian life is quite different, for sure. Um, Also, I would say that, and here, of course, I'm fully aware of the extreme variety of Protestantism, so I'm about to generalize a lot, and I know that my generalizations will be wrong for many people. So, big caveat there. But I would say that Orthodox Christianity is an extremely tactile religious faith, that what we do with our bodies is extremely important, not just in terms of morality, like the actions that you take that are good or bad, but rather that for us, Christianity is very much bound up in ritual. So I know that for a
Mm-hmm.
certain variety of Protestant, that sounds like what we would call dead religion. I've been Orthodox Christian for almost 30 years now, having been an evangelical Protestant before that, and it has never, ever felt dead to me. It is extremely alive.
Yeah.
That this is the way that for me, the events in the scripture become today, that I'm present at them through this ritual participation, right? And so that's one thing that I think would be very striking for a Protestant to walk into an Orthodox church, particularly a non-liturgical Protestant. But even many of the liturgical Protestants would be like, wow, this is like 100 times the kind of level of liturgy that I'm used to, like most of our services are basically sung or read in a very solemn way, back to back. There's no like start and stop and okay, everybody please open your hymnal too. Like that's not a thing in the Orthodox Church. It's going whether you like it or not, whether you're involved or not. No one's checking to see if you're
Yeah.
engaged. It's happening around you, so it's something you enter into rather than something that is being done kind of for your benefit.
Yeah.
Um,
So good.
so, That's another really big difference. And of course, our churches look quite different from most Protestant churches. They are typically quite the feast for the eyes,
Mhm.
and not just the eyes, of course, but the ears as well. And I mean, you mentioned smell. We use incense in almost every single service. We're simply doing like it says in the Old Testament that incense would be offered to God in every
Yep.
nation. So we're doing that, just like the prophet said. So yeah, it's a very physically engaging faith, and I think, I mean, I find that very personally fulfilling because human beings are body and soul.
Hmm.
We're not Cartesian souls trapped inside the shell of a body. You are a body that is ensouled, right? I mean, when God creates man, he doesn't make a soul and then put it inside a cage. He
Hmm.
makes a body and then breathes life into it,
Yeah.
right? So, and of course, the resurrection at the end of time shows that the human body is integral to who it is that we are, and so it makes sense, therefore, to me, that religious life would be very, very bodily. And
Yeah.
the truth is that when the body is used in this way, it it shapes the soul as well.
Yeah, that's right.
Uh, However you want to understand what the soul is, it absolutely shapes the soul as well. Because if the soul is the life of the body, then that means that the body is, is deeply entwined with the soul.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so there it is. Those are the things that I would probably point to as kind of the most obvious differences right away. There's a lot of other things I could mention, doctrinal things, what salvation is for us, all that kind of stuff. But
Well, and maybe we'll get into as we talk more specifics about angels and demons, maybe some of those other resources that are informing how the Orthodox community has been talking about this will also surface. But so speaking of kind of engaging differences, let's talk about this ancient mindset versus the modern mindset. So how do we take these ancient words, these ancient writings that are very comfortable in a mythological world and translate it into a modern culture that's more comfortable in a scientific minded world? And so I'm kind of pushing into the bridge between them. And so maybe some of that might be maybe we're not as scientific minded or anti mythology as we think that we are. That might be an aspect of this
yeah,
question. But we're definitely talking about people who attributed harsh and uncontrollable environments. So the chaos of the ocean or the harshness of a desert. And they take those environments and they attribute those characteristics to serpents, dragons, and mythological creatures, right? So we have science that describes those environments. So, what do we do with those serpents and dragons?
yeah. Well, they are very much still there. Um, yeah, I think, as you said, I think we're actually not quite as disenchanted as we tend to think we are. And the example that I like to give, and this is not original to me, but I think it works really well, is money. Money is
Mhm.
probably the most pervasive enchantment of human life now, right? So back in the day, our ancestors, if you were to talk about money, there would be a physical object that you could point to, right? But even then, it has a kind of an enchanted character to it. The idea that this is valuable in a particular way and you can exchange it for goods and services, that this can become that. That is enchantment. That is absolutely enchantment. But now, most of us never see the vast majority of the money that we spend.
That's right.
Where is it exactly? There's a card that we use, there's a ritual that we go through in order to make this thing happen.
Mm.
Hold it up against something, swipe it in something, hand it to someone. These are absolutely ritual acts, because there's no point in that where I'm actually handing a pile of gold to another person.
Okay.
There's all these acts of signification.
Yeah.
You have a card, you might sign your name, which again is another ritual act. Why is it that writing your name with ink binds you in a way that's legal? Because of a common ritual that we're all sharing, which is this ritual of legality, right? And think about the way that that the enchantment of money drives our world, not
Mm.
just our individual transactions,
Yep.
but it moves governments, it starts wars, it makes some people starve, it makes some people able to live. Like all of these things that in the ancient world were understood as being divine, having divine unseen currents pushing all these things. We have this unseen current that we call currency, literally pushing all of these things, right? So we know enchantment. We just don't think of it as that, right?
Yeah.
Most people, you could say, well, what exactly does your bank account consist of? Ones and zeros in data somewhere. And there are people who can literally press a button and magically make more money exist. It's called the
Right.
Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve are magicians. They're sorcerers that have this council, and they gather together and they decide this is how much money is worth, and we're going to make more of it. We're going to make some of it disappear, right? So all of this is already in play, and the idea that we're all absolute kind of empirical materialists. It's a deception, I think, that we've all sort of accepted.
Yeah.
It's not who we really are, right? So yeah. So what do you do then with like, well, we can say the ocean is moving and we know what causes that or whatever. The truth is, yes, there are things that we can measure, but measuring is not the same thing as an explanation for how this and why this is happening. You know, why is it that gravity is a thing? We don't really know. We have this category of gravity, which is this unseen force that is being exerted on, like right now, you and I, even though we're miles and miles apart, are actually exerting gravity on one another because we are both composed of mass. Now, everything in between us is also doing the same thing. I don't feel it, you don't feel it, but it is there. It is this kind of enchanted reality, right? And also the other thing is that there's a lot of ways of knowing things and experiencing things that are not empirically measurable
Yeah.
and yet are absolutely real. I mean, the classic example is, did your mother love you? And people can say yes or no very clearly most of the time on that question. And yet there is no way of empirically measuring that. You could point to there are signs, right? There are signs that she loved you. She did this for me. She did this for me. She says this to me, or she did not do these things. So therefore she must not love me. And yet that does not explain the binding feeling that we have or the utter revulsion that we have about that relationship.
Mm.
You could measure things that indicate that feeling, maybe brain waves or heart doing certain things, but that still does not really define what that is or how that relationship works. There's something about it that is beyond our ability to measure. So, I think I mean, we can't flip a switch and think like an ancient person or experience the world like an ancient person did. That's just not possible. But
Right.
I think we can begin to have something of an intellectual framework for it. And these examples that I've given are a way to kind of begin to get into that. I think if you were to say to an ancient person, well, I don't think there's a dragon at the bottom of the sea because look, I put this measuring device down there and I know why there were earthquakes and so that's why this tsunami began, or whatever. I think an ancient person when faced with that would not say, "Oh my gosh, it's true, there's no dragon down there." I think that they would say, look, you're just measuring the thrashing of the dragon's tail. Yeah, you can't see the dragon. We never said everybody could see the dragon. We never said that there was like a big lizard. We never said that. That's the thing is I think that there's this modern empiricist idea about what ancient people were actually claiming.
Yeah. Yep.
But that's because we're not reading the things that they said about themselves. They had a very strong sense of invisible and visible, and um, modern people believe in invisible forces too. We just give them different names. So yeah, there's nothing about the scientific revolution that I think has debunked anything in that regard. And the fact that we tend to, like, the way that we think about ancient people and divinity is that oh, they're seeing natural stuff happening, and so they're trying to come up with an explanation for that. That is not how they themselves describe their experiences, right? So that's a model that we're imposing on what they said. And it doesn't explain a lot of things that they did. So why is it, for instance, that some of the most ancient religious sites are out in the middle of incredibly inhospitable places
Hmm.
that archaeology and geology and stuff show was never hospitable? Why is it that those are there? The things that those people said is, I was out there and a spirit appeared to me or spoke to me. And so we built this incredibly expensive thing out in the middle of nowhere because this has become a shrine for pilgrimage
Yeah.
so that other people can at least connect with the place where this event happened, right? So I think that at least the beginning is to try to take ancient people on their own terms as much as we can, as much as we can. We can't completely get there. We are people of our age, but we can at least begin by trying to be a little bit more honest and a little bit more curious rather than judgmental, and realize that we have a lot of assumptions that we're bringing to the way that we read and look at things from the ancient past.
And I think along with that is you mentioned judgment that we bring, and there is a false view that we are significantly more intelligent than ancient people. And
Yeah,
I feel like I can point to all kinds of buildings where we still don't know how they built things, or their use of the material world was brilliant and on par with anything that we're coming up with. So if we could destroy that judgment or that idea, that we are so much more enlightened and intelligent than they were, I think that would also maybe help us hear ancient people and read ancient writings according to the way that they would like to discuss it.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so to get into the heavenly realm, one of the questions I was asked to ask of you is, what or who are some of the spiritual beings in the heavenly realms, and what are their roles? So that's huge. And I would point people towards your podcast and say, maybe we could start with, who are angels? What,
Okay.
what are angels?
Yeah, those are actually two separate questions
Yeah.
almost. Um, so I'll start with the what, because I think that's probably the place where most people are comfortable, rather than starting with
Okay.
the who, which is where I prefer to start. But
Okay.
the what, so angels are in the Orthodox Christian tradition, and I would say probably most Christians would agree with this, probably from what they would see in the Bible. Angels are immaterial beings created by God. So immaterial means that they don't have physical bodies the way that you and I have physical bodies. And yet they are, and now I'm kind of cribbing off of, one of my big heroes, who is St. John of Damascus, this book on the Orthodox faith. It's sort of, it's a little difficult to read, especially at the beginning, but it's kind of a compendium of the whole tradition of Christianity up to the 8th century, roughly.
Mm.
And so what he says about angels, he calls them lesser lights illuminated by the great light. And by that he means
Mm.
God, of course, which I
Yep.
love that image. So they are these secondary beings. And in the scriptures, actually, they're referred to as gods. But the scriptures have no problem calling them gods and also saying, well, God is God, but these are also gods, but not in the same way
Yeah. Yeah.
that God is God, right? So many times it says, who among the gods is like unto thee, O Yahweh. It says you're different from the rest, right? It doesn't have any problem with using these words in multiple ways. It turns out language works that way. So they're created to do His will. They are created. Their main job is to praise Him. It kind of depends on which angels you're talking about. Deliver messages from Him, to fight against dark spiritual powers, to be guardians at His throne. These are all things that we actually see explicitly in the Bible, and of course continue on in Christian tradition for 2,000 years now. And there also seems to be a group of seven that are standing right at his throne. They are referenced in the Apocalypse of St. John, the book of Revelation. And we have a names for a few of them. So this is now kind of moving into the who a little bit. Um, the two, if you just have a Protestant Bible, the two names you know about are Michael and Gabriel.
Yeah.
If you have an Orthodox or a Catholic Bible, then you also have Raphael, who is in the book of Tobit. And there are other traditional names, but there's actually a lot of variation as to what those other four traditional names are across time and space. So I won't dive into those, but people can look those up. And so these seven archangels um, often seem to fulfill multiple roles at a time. So, Gabriel is regarded as one of the commanders of the heavenly hosts, which is a kind of a military sort of image, but also he's the one sent to deliver a message to the Virgin Mary. You're going to conceive the Son of God, right? Saint Michael is he's a guardian of the people of Israel, and yet he also is being sent to do battle with specific dark. There's a point where it says that uh, he argues over the body of Moses with the devil, right? That's in the Bible, right? Which is a passage I'd never heard preached on when I was a Protestant, but it's right there in the New Testament. This contention over the body of Moses. What
Yeah.
could that possibly mean?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of stuff in there that people don't look closely at. The angels collectively are also often referred to as the heavenly hosts, which
Mhm.
hosts, of course, is a great old-fashioned English word, and it refers to armies. So it's God is called Yahweh Sabaoth, the Yahweh God of armies, right? So there's this very martial kind of image there. And this language is there because there are dark spiritual powers too, and so that's the enemy that's being fought against. And often it's described that God, when He's present with people, that He's present with His holy angels. So there's a reference to when Christ comes back that He's going to come back with His holy
Mm.
angels,
Mhm.
right? One of the things that a lot of people don't seem to notice in the Bible, if they're only familiar like with the Charlton Heston film Ten Commandments. Moses is on Mount Sinai, receives the Ten Commandments from God, and in the movie, he's all alone, and he just
Right.
hears this booming voice, and then suddenly the Ten Commandments appear, with fire letters out of the side of the mountain. I mean, this is pretty cool special effects for mid 20th century. But it doesn't say this in Exodus, and I'm sure that's where Cecil B. DeMille got most of his script is from Exodus. But three places in the New Testament, it actually refers to the Torah being given by angels.
Mm.
So if you're really going to actually have a biblical version of the scene, you should have Moses up there, and he should see a bunch of angels kind of handing the Torah off to him from God,
Mm.
right? And I think that this is one of the things that a lot of folks who may be familiar with Christianity don't realize is that angels are present constantly when God is kind of on the scene. When Isaiah sees him, for instance, in his visions,
Mhm.
he's surrounded by angels. It's what's called in scholarly texts the divine council, but this is not a
Right.
scholarly term that scholars made up. It comes straight out of Psalm 82. God stood up in the divine council or the assembly of the gods or however you want to translate it, but that is right there at the beginning of that psalm, the notion that God is surrounded by his heavenly hosts. And so they are his servants. They have no physical form of their own, but they can appear to people in whatever way God permits them to. Unlike most of the memes you see on the internet, most of them do not appear as what people call biblically accurate angels, where you see piles of wings and eyes and all this kind of weird stuff. I mean, that is in the Bible for sure. But most of the time that angels show up and there's a description of them, it says that they look like young men or like a man, you know. Most of the time they look human, everybody. That's a biblically accurate angel as well, even more so than the weird ones. I mean, the weird ones are cool. I mean, who doesn't love a good Ezekiel
They're really
vision?
great.
Wheels in the sky,
That's right.
just like Journey
Just open
sings.
to Ezekiel and take your pick.
Yeah, exactly. But those visions are visions of the throne of God, largely speaking. And so you get all these weird things. And the reason why you get that imagery is because that is the normal imagery for thrones of gods in the ancient Near East. So like cherubim,
Yep.
uh, sphinxes, this
Yep.
is the same thing.
Yep.
right? And seraphim in the most ancient depictions are basically snakes with wings, burning fiery snakes with wings, which when you know that, that goes a long ways to explaining what exactly is going on in Genesis chapter 3
Yeah.
with this snake in the Garden of Eden. What is that all about?
Yeah.
So yeah, that I would say that's kind of a quick and dirty guide to who and what are angels. There's a lot more that one could say, of course, especially about the ones who fall. That's
Well,
one where people get a lot of people are very interested in that too.
yes. So before we go there, I have two questions. So one, you were talking about how angels can appear in human form. So is it some fantastical metaphysical arrangement of things, or are they putting on humanity temporarily? So that's one question that comes up. And the other one is, are there ranks of angels? So why do we only get the names of a few? And so then people like, or angels like Gabriel, and then there are other hosts. So is he of an upper rank?
Yeah. So okay. So number one, angels do not put on humanity. They are not incarnate, right? They can appear to be human, right? And sometimes they appear to be human in such a way that humans can't tell.
Yeah.
I mean, St. Paul mentions this, people entertain angels unawares, right? And of course, the book of Tobit is all about the archangel Raphael showing up and being completely, they don't know he's an angel to the very end. He's like, surprise. Um, Everyone should read that book. Whether you regard it as scripture or not, everyone should read the book. It's just a cool quest story, everybody. And it includes a big demon lord, actually. So, um, yeah, so angels are not incarnate. They do not take on humanity. They are their own nature. They don't have human nature. The only being who has ever taken on more than one nature is the Son of God, who is
Yeah.
divine and human in the incarnation. So they appear to humans as human. What exactly does that mean? We tend to think, like the reason why someone would ask, like, okay, they're taking on a human body or whatever, is because we think in terms of objects in space. But the way that most ancient people thought is that the way you see things, the way you hear things,
Yeah.
is not, you're not observing an object with an instrument, but rather what you have. So there's the word in Greek is nous, which often gets translated as nous, and that is often translated as mind or intellect, but it's not really that. It's kind of the eye of the soul. And so your nous takes in thoughts, right? So, which is great news, actually, if you're dealing with horrible thoughts. You know, my thoughts are not me, they are something I'm receiving, you know? And so, uh, in technical theological terms, then what we would say is that a person's nous is receiving an image of a human and that's manifesting this angel's presence.
Mm-hmm.
So they're having a spiritual experience, but set aside what we think of as spiritual experiences, which are all kind of woo. I mean, you're literally having a spiritual experience right now by looking at a computer screen and those, so from ancient anthropological point of view, I mean, even the pagans looked at it this way. The Greek pagans looked at it this way. You're receiving thoughts through into, your physical eyes, but you're receiving thoughts in your spiritual eye. Hearing my voice, that means something to you. All of that is receiving thoughts. And so what you're receiving is an image of a human. And this is not too crazy because isn't that how an actual eye works that we've learned? We take them apart, we see light hits
Yeah.
the back of the eye, the retina, it gets weird things happen to it. And seeing is actually a function in your brain, right? Which is that just an empirical description of what ancient people already believed? I don't know, but it sure sounds like it.
Yeah.
So we just tend to think of it as objects in space. But the truth is that what I see and what you see are different things. I'm not colorblind, but someone who is colorblind sees a different world than I see.
That's right.
And
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
explained it in terms of they have this deficiency or whatever, but there are animals that, of course, see way more colors than we do. So are we the ones with the deficiency? I don't know. But in any
Yeah.
event, yeah. So angels can appear to be human, not because they become humans. but because that's the image that God is permitting them to use in order to communicate with us, right? So then, I'm trying to remember what the other thing you asked. Oh yeah,
Rank, are there
ranks. Yeah, the ranks of
ranks?
angels. Yes. So
Yeah.
yes, there are traditionally ranks of angels, and in the Bible, they're all mentioned. Traditionally, there are nine ranks of angels. They're all mentioned in the Bible, but they're never given in a kind of list,
Hmm.
right? Like here's the top ones and here's the bottom ones. But what has happened is that early Christian writers, reading the Bible very closely, um, came up with lists to try to work out what exactly we're seeing. So it's clear in the Bible
Hmm.
that some angels are kind of closer to God than others. And so it makes, although what does that mean? It's not a physical space question, but that's how it's presented to us because that's how we think is in terms of physical space, right? Because these are immaterial beings. So what does it mean for them to be in one place and not another? I mean, St. John of Damascus says they can be in one place and not another, which is part of why we say that they're not God, because only God is truly omnipresent, so they can be one place or another. But what exactly is the limitation of that? He says only God knows.
Hmm.
Where is it that they are and where is it that they aren't? God knows that, right?
Yeah.
But anyways, this language of closeness to God is what's used in the Bible. And so then this is thought of in terms of ranks, right? So the very top levels, you've got the cherubim and the seraphim that are, I'm trying to do this from memory now. Cherubim and seraphim who are the throne guardians. These
Hmm.
are, again, these are everywhere in ancient Near Eastern religion. All the
Yep.
pagans use this imagery as well.
We have all kinds of great statues that
Oh,
depict
yes.
them.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. And then you also have the what are often called thrones or wheels, because the throne of God has wheels, especially in Ezekiel's vision of it. And the reason why the throne of God has wheels, actually, there's this one very ancient depiction of it on a coin where it looks like God is sitting in what looks like a wheelchair, because he's got this chair and it's got big
Yeah.
wheels on it, you know.
Yeah.
But the reason why the throne of God has wheels is it's an attempt to use imagery to convey mobility. And why mobility? Why is the throne of God mobile? It's because it's everywhere, unlike the pagan gods whose thrones are in particular places. And
Yep.
so that means their territory is limited. You know, this is actually an apologetic against paganism,
Yeah.
that the throne of God has wheels. All right. So you've got those three top ranks that are up there, and those are the ones that are regarded as the highest and the ones that are closest to God, right? And so then you also have dominions, powers, and principalities, right? So dominions are the ones that are, and virtues as well. Sorry, yeah, that's kind of the next set. So these are ones that either govern nations or places. And there's some hints at this in the Bible, but it's
Hmm.
all over other kinds of ancient literature that Jews were passing around and reading and regarding as representing their beliefs, like the Book of Jubilees, the Enochic literature, this kind of stuff. Which the Orthodox, we don't regard this as scripture, but they are representations of what people thought in the first century and the centuries right before, right? So, like in Jubilees,
Well,
for
and
instance,
Enoch seems to be influencing several of our epistles. So when I've
absolutely.
interviewed people on epistles, they're like, you have to understand Enoch. Otherwise, you just don't get what's going
Absolutely.
on.
And Jubilees makes its way into the New Testament as well, right? So like Jubilees, I would say is probably the easiest of this literature to read because it's essentially the book of Genesis kind of from another angle.
Hmm.
And so one of the fun parts in there is that as various elements of creation come into being, God assigns angels over particular elements,
Hmm.
right? And so there's even four angels, one for each of the four seasons, which I love this image, right? And this is not explicit in the Bible. It's not a dogmatic teaching of the church. I'm not saying you must believe this in order to be a Christian or whatever, but it's completely consistent with the Bible. And I've always said, okay, if I ever get to meet the angel of autumn, like when we're recording this, we're just days away from the beginning of autumn, astronomically anyway. If I ever get to meet the angel of autumn, the first thing I'm going to say to him is, number one, big fan of your work. You're the best. Don't tell the other ones.
Well,
Big
you and I
fan of your
both
work.
live in Pennsylvania,
That's
where
right.
autumn is
That's
extraordinary.
great. That's right. That's right. But also, I would ask him, so like pumpkin spice lattes, is that your idea, or like is this blasphemy, or what? Um, but yeah, so the idea that the angels are over the winds and the waves and all this kind of stuff, and so these are the virtues. The virtues are the ones that sort of govern creation, right? But then you also have angels as part of this kind of sub rank. that their job is to do battle against the dark powers, right?
Mm.
So they're sort of the very militaristic shock troops, of the heavenly hosts, and we see this in the Bible. Saint Michael against the Prince of Persia. What is that all about?
Yeah, yeah.
Again, like this stuff is going on in the Bible, largely being ignored by a lot of modern Christians. And then the very bottom two ranks are the archangels and angels, right? And those are the ones that are associated with dealing directly with human beings in
Mm.
one way or another. Delivering mess. And the word angelos itself, from which we get angel, it literally just means messenger. That's all it
Hmm.
really means. It does not mean a spiritual being, but it means a messenger. And the Hebrew equivalent, which I think is something like malak or something like this,
Hmm.
I can't pronounce Hebrew very well. It literally also just means messenger. So the Greek is just a translation directly of the Hebrew word. Um, Then you also have these seven archangels who seem to be like outside of those nine ranks. They're these seven spirits that stand at the throne of God, to use the Revelation language. And these are the ones that we have that have names, that at least we have a few of their names. And they can sort of slot into any of those functions at any time. Michael and Gabriel, for instance, are sometimes described as being seraphim. And yet also Gabriel is delivering messages.
Mm.
You know, Michael is battling directly against demons. If you understand an ancient or even a medieval court, or even frankly a modern court, the people who are next to the
Yeah,
ruler are kind of the highest advisors. You
right.
know, we still have throne guardians in our time. They're called the Secret Service. This is still absolutely a thing in our world. And you see someone that if they're seated next to the king of Great Britain, or next to the president of the United States, or whatever, um, that person is probably a big deal,
Yeah.
you know? So this is still absolutely a thing that we understand kind of intuitively. But yeah, so that's the understanding of the ranks. And so they're described as either being close to the throne of God or kind of farther away. And St. John of Damascus, at one point in his discussion of angels, he says, look, we don't know if what these aren't is species, because the images that we get are, again, they're just what we are receiving. So that's not the way that their bodies are shaped or anything like that, because they don't have bodies like we have bodies. He says whether they are all of one nature or each one is his own nature. I mean, the language of his is used, but they don't actually have sex. They are not male or female. And he says the reason that they don't have gender, that's the word I guess we'd usually use, is because they're not mortal. Because almost all the church fathers, basically the main way that they talk about male and female is in terms of reproduction. And so they don't reproduce because they're not mortal, so they don't have to reproduce. Their species will continue to exist. And so that's why he says we don't know if they are each their own individual nature, or if there's just
Mm.
one nature that they all have. He says some fathers say this, some fathers say that. That's why I call him the great schoolmaster among the fathers, is he tells you, well, some scholars say, and other
Yeah.
scholars say, he's just teaching a class,
Yeah.
which from sources that he knows super duper well.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, there's this idea of ranks. It's in the Bible. All of these ranks are specifically mentioned at various places in the Bible, but there's not kind of a taxonomy given. And there's one point where St. Paul names of a bunch of them all at once. We do not wrestle against flesh or blood, but against powers and principalities. Like he starts listing off stuff. And this is where a lot of the early church fathers are going, okay, I'm taking notes here, ranks 1 through 6. And that's how it sort of works out. Again, these are not dogmatic statements that the
Yeah.
Orthodox Church makes, but this is our tradition, and there's kind of no
Yeah.
reason to chuck it.
Yeah. Right. Okay, so on the flip side of that, who are demons and what do demons do?
Yeah, the other side, the other team, as it were. So the word demon can mean a lot of stuff. I like to shock people by saying, the great philosopher Socrates, he said, I have a demon. And everybody's like, ooh, wow, man, you are so blessed. You know, and that would shock people these days because we think of we hear the word demon actually in a very Christian way.
Yeah, we do.
This is
Yeah.
evil and dark and whatever.
Yep.
But all it means in the ancient world is lesser
Hmm.
spiritual being, kind of the local spirits or whatever. That's how it's typically used. Sometimes it does get applied in pagan context to some of these greater ones, like Zeus is called a daemon at one point in one of the ancient texts. But generally speaking, this word means sort of the lesser kind of local beings, and it's
And thought
Christian.
of then, I mean, if we're thinking of it just on the term alone and not with the Christian, they're evil and, companions to Satan, then them being lesser beings, does it put them lesser than the angels who are at the lesser rank, who are the messengers? Is there a complete distinction between form and function?
So I do not recall any Christian source referring to angels as daemon. Um, I imagine if you were to maybe corner one of the early church fathers and say, "Are they?" and he might say, "Well, technically yes, but that's not what we use that word for anymore."
Yeah. Okay.
That's I'm just speculating here.
Yeah.
So no one hold me to that. But Christians particularly use this word to refer to pagan gods as an
Yeah.
insult.
Yeah.
Like, like, you're saying that they're great rulers. They're just like the local thugs. That's what they're saying is, it's like when American media refer to, the government of some country that we don't like, as being led by a strong man or, a regime that we use that word regime, whatever. It's a way of demoting, um, you know,
Mm,
whereas those countries are probably using the word like president and whatever for to refer to their leader.
right.
Where Christians are basically insulting the gods of the nations by calling them demons. In fact, in it's not just Christians; it's Israelites from of old. I mean, this is in the Psalms. All the gods of the nations. In the Greek translation, it says are demon demons, and then in the Hebrew, it's el elim. All the gods of the nations are worthless. Right. So again, it's smack talk. In the Bible.
I love such
Uh,
a good way to put it.
it absolutely is. There's all kinds of smack talk in the
Yeah, there
scriptures.
is.
You know, we're so used to kind of we think of sacralized language as being clean and neat, but that's
Yeah.
kind of a Victorian sensibility, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, you know,
Yeah, even Jesus, like sometimes is doing all kinds of smack talk
oh
politically,
yeah,
which is highly hilarious and entertaining if you put it all
absolutely.
in context.
There are words that he uses that probably we would think of as being dirty words, and certainly the apostles do. St. Paul does. St. Paul could be a little randy in some of the stuff he says. But anyway, so yes, seeing them as kind of lesser beings, this is a Christian way of putting this. Now, pagans believed in demons too, but for them, it's just like a local spiritual being, more powerful than humans. More powerful than humans. So when Socrates says, "I had a demon," and everyone said, "You're so lucky," and Socrates says, "This is where my wisdom comes from, is I have this spiritual being whispering in my ear," and in a pagan context, that's great. You want that. You're
Mm-hmm.
being favored by like a little local god. Good for you, buddy. Right. But nowhere in the scriptures or nowhere in most of Christian tradition does anyone say that these spiritual beings don't exist. No one's saying that.
Yeah.
It's understood that they exist. So I say all that because the word demon gets applied in two ways traditionally in Christianity. The way that we tend to think of it as most common is we call fallen angels demons, right? So when someone says angels and demons, they mean two of the same thing. One is good, one is bad, and absolutely that is a traditional way to put it. But remembering, of course, that we're insulting the the one side by saying you're just like lesser local whatever, rather than these glorious beings in the heavens. That's why this language of falling is being used. In other words, you had this glorious position and you've been deposed.
Mm.
You've been deposed from that place. So that's why the language of fall is implemented in the scriptures and throughout Christian tradition, is that they now are kind of walking around on the earth, losers, is sort of what's going on there. And foremost among them, of course, is a figure that we call the devil. In Christian tradition, even in pre-Christian Israelite tradition, it's not clear whether the devil, Satan, we could add some names,
The accuser, just
Azazel,
flat out the accuser. Yeah.
Azazel, Mastema. These are all the devil, but they might actually be three or four or two different beings because the point was never to create a taxonomy of the dark powers. Oh, who's the guy at the top? They don't function that way anyway. Like this is not like a royal court with the this is not like Milton where he's like, oh, better to reign in hell. Like no, 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 no. No, these are chaos monsters who are trying to drag us down into chaos. The point was always it was not who exactly is the devil and what does he do and what are his powers and his authorities and whatever. It's what do humans beings do about the fact that the devil is present in our lives. So it's phenomenological. What is my experience and what do I do about that? Right? So it doesn't really matter whether the devil is one figure or multiple figures. It doesn't matter. But what's interesting is that this figure that we call the devil. So the devil is means the divider or the one who throws things apart. Diabolos in Greek. Shaitan, in Hebrew, the opposer or the accuser. This is the one that you see in the book of Job. You
Hmm.
know, and then there's also this figure called Azazel, who is the goat demon of the wilderness, that
Hmm.
is the origin of all sin, according to some of these texts. And
Yep.
that when the goat is sent out at the Day of Atonement, having had the sins put upon it, it's being sent out. It literally says in the Hebrew, the goat for Azazel. Now, it's not being sacrificed to Azazel because a sacrifice is a meal you share with your God. It's not an animal that you send out as kind of a taxi to take the sins where they belong, right? But these spiritual beings, these dark spiritual beings, are regarded as the origin of evil, and the human beings didn't come up with evil on our own. We're being oppressed by the devil. We're being seduced by the devil, drawn in, participating with the devil whenever we sin, right? Um, but there's
And I think
also,
one of the key concepts which you did mention is the agent of chaos. Like, and that also is all over the place in the Bible. I
yep,
mean, this is how we start the creation narratives in terms of things are chaotic, and God divides and organizes and creates, and the kingdom of God is one that takes chaos and puts things into right
that's
order,
right.
into shalom, into the way that things are supposed to be.
Yeah,
And I think that idea of attaching chaos with demons is also super important for us to try to get our head around what's actually happening.
yeah, yeah. I mean, if I were to put that into modern scientific terms, I would call it entropy.
Mm,
Which is the things breaking apart, right? So the creation, as you said, begins with God taking chaos and bringing order and then filling it with life. And then what are the two things that he says to Adam and Eve to do? Put this place in order and fill it with life. So
yeah,
continue the work of God. Human beings were made to continue the work of God. And what demons are doing is undoing that, right? And so sin is destructive because it's literally destructive. It's not
yeah,
just destructive metaphorically speaking, it's tearing apart that which God has put together,
yep, yep.
right? So yeah, that's what's going on there. The other thing, and this will be a kind of maybe a little weird and controversial for some people, but and I'm not saying you have to believe this, but the way that first century Israelites and even those in the previous centuries, as we know from the writings that they were sharing between each other, the other kind of being that they referred to as demons were dead humans.
Hmm.
They were, and not just any dead humans, but demonized humans, right? And one of the groups that they would point to as being these are whatever was being produced there in Genesis chapter 6. When you get fallen angels, this is how people at that time saw it. Again, I'm not saying this is dogma; it's not. But fallen angels are somehow doing something with human women. Now, maybe it's through some kind of pagan temple ritual where you've got multiple humans involved. And so, of course, conceiving a human being is possible in those terms, but some kind of dark spiritual force. And you get humans that are somehow mixed up with dark spiritual powers, right?
Hmm.
So a hybridization that should not be. And if there's anything that the Torah is not cool with, it's hybrids, you know, stuff that touches or is mixed that should not be touching or mixed. And therefore it's unclean, right? And so it's interesting that in the New Testament, spirits that mess with people and are oppressing them are referred to as precisely with this word as unclean,
Hmm.
meaning it doesn't just mean
Hmm.
they're dirty. It means that they're they are Torah unclean. They are things that are mixed that should not have been mixed. And
Mm.
uh, the belief, absolutely, the belief in the first century in the Holy Land was that the unclean spirits that are kind of wandering around messing with people are fallen humans, and they're so fallen that even sort of the presence of their spirit in Hades is kind of weirdly compromised, you know. Um, and it's interesting. People might say, okay, well, does that idea kind of continue on? Does anyone believe in that after that? That's a weird first century thing, you know, unclean spirits. St. John Chrysostom, who's a late fourth, early fifth century church father. So this is now, you know, after Christianization is well underway in the Roman Empire, and there's paganism is on its way out. Um, he actually says he in one of his sermons he talks about a kind of urban legend that's been going around. And so, being a good pastor, he's like, okay, look, I need to address this, you guys. I hear some of you saying this. This is you're wrong about this. I have to set you straight. He says there's this idea that some of you have that if someone dies a violent death, that they become a demon after death. You know, and he says he doesn't say the thing that modern people might expect him to say, you know, which is, oh, that's not a thing. People don't become demons. That's not what he says. He says that's not how you become a demon after death. You become a demon after death by living like one before death.
Huh.
So he fully accepts
Okay.
that human beings can be demonized. Now, that doesn't mean that someone who is of human nature takes on fallen angel nature, but that rather what happens is they function like the fallen angels, and so they become demonic, right? I mean, it's the opposite of when Christ in Luke chapter 20 says that the sons of the resurrection are sons of God and equal to the angels. So that's the flip side of this. People can become angelic, which that's just
Mm.
what a saint is, but you know the unclean spirits is these are the opposite of saints. They have become demonic by participating in the demonic
Mm.
powers.
Mm.
And so I mean, it's a very, very dark and horrible thing to contemplate, of course. And I would say that most people, this never happens to them, even some of the most evil people. But it's clear that it does happen to some people, and it definitely was. I mean, you can't find really counterfactuals on this. If you're looking at texts from the first century and from the first few centuries before that, there in the Holy Land, this is just what people believe that it's unclean fallen humans that are the demons that are kind of running around messing with people at this
Mm.
period. So that's the other kind of class of beings that we would think of as demons.
So, as opposed to people who are becoming demonic, thinking again, you mentioned Luke, and Luke has all kinds of encounters between God and demons. And so I think one of the questions that people have thrown my way is there a difference between demon possession and demon oppression? And so therefore, how vulnerable are Jesus followers to either of those things?
Yeah, yeah. I get this question a lot myself, actually. So yes, there is a difference between being attacked by a demon and being possessed by a demon. Everyone is being attacked by demons pretty much 24/7. Every time you have an evil thought, that is, according to Christian tradition, that is being suggested to you by the dark powers, right? Because
And
again,
we all have thoughts that feel like they're coming from outside us. So that
absolutely.
is something that, whether we attribute that to a demon or not, is something we all have experience with.
That's right. That's right. And to me, this is one of the proofs. It's not an empirical proof, but to me, this is one of the proofs of the unseen world. Is that people have experienced evil and experienced evil thoughts that they cannot explain, right? And there is nothing on the horizon to scientifically measure that. I know, you know, someone who really, really is a true believer in empiricism would just say, "Well, it's just a matter of time. You know, we'll get there. Whatever. Good luck." You know, yes, so we're all being demonically oppressed. St. Paul was demonically oppressed. He described that an angel of Satan was sent to buffet in the King James, you know, but that means pummel, you know, he's being beaten up. We don't know exactly what the experience he was having was, but he asked God 3 times to take it away. And God said, "No, my grace is sufficient for you. So this is what you're going to continue to experience, Paul." Um, yeah, so demonic possession. It's interesting. In the Old Testament, you pretty much don't see this.
Yeah.
It shows up in the New Testament. Suddenly you've got all these exorcisms going on, you know? Why is that? Well, most pagan religions actually did not practice what Christians would call demonic possession, but from their point of view would be being inhabited by a god, you know? Uh, but Greek paganism totally had it. It was a stock part of Greek life. Read almost any Greek piece of drama, and someone is going to go to the oracle at Delphi or some other place, and there's someone there who is being possessed, usually by Apollo, and they take, oh wow, this is the oracle from a god. The god is speaking to me, you know. So demonic possession is something that they ritually practiced and wanted and thought was a good idea. Now, it's clearly, even you read these texts, it's clearly a bad experience for the person experiencing it. So most people don't want it, right? Like it's a lot to go through, but they want it in their society. Like this is a dirty job and someone has to do it. Um, you know, like read the Aeneid, and you know when the Sibyl gets possessed by Apollo, it's horrifying. You know, like you don't want to be the Sibyl, but everyone's glad that the Sibyl is around. You know, so demonic possession is being practiced, and it makes sense, therefore, that the ministry of exorcism is going to respond to this, right? You know, so in Israel, to be possessed by a daemon, by a lesser spirit, is not a good thing. You don't want that, you know. And so exorcism is being done as a response to this. Um, in all of the traditional literature about this, demon possession is something that happens with consent. It happens
Hmm.
with deliberate human participation. Now, it could be the participation of an adult who wants to be or is being forced to be going through the ritual experience of demonic possession, or sometimes it could be a child that this is being done to, who doesn't have the defenses to kind of push back against it. We see demon possessed children in the Gospels,
Hmm.
and Jesus healing them. And one of the questions that people should ask is, what did these parents do
Hmm.
that brought this demon into this child's life? Were they looking to get their fortune told? Were they looking to, get success in life or
Hmm.
whatever, that people go to demons for? Sometimes that's kind of hinted at in the Gospels, sometimes not. Um, but yes, so demonic possession is not something that can just sort of, whoops, I said the wrong word, or I watched the wrong movie, or I read the wrong book, or I looked at the wrong thing, and bam, I pressed the wrong button, and now I'm demonically possessed. That is,
Hmm.
that's not how this works. It's funny how much people who, like Christians should not believe in magic, not because we shouldn't believe in spiritual forces, but because magic is actually a demonic lie. Magic is the idea that if you do certain things, if you follow a certain formula, then you will automatically get these results. That's not prayer. Prayer is when you ask for something and then God could say yes or maybe later or whatever. That's a relationship. Whereas magic is about, forcing particular results. Um, you know, Magic doesn't actually work. Demons just want you to think it works. So that's
Hmm.
why there's a lot of magic going on in paganism, but it's not all magic. There is magic as part of their practice.
Yeah.
Do the following things and you will get this result. So, demonic possession is not magic. It's not magic. It does happen, but it happens with consent, whether it's the consent of the person who wants it for themselves or thinks that they should do it. Or again, like I said, people doing it to kids, which is a horrifying thought. But notice how much Jesus does exorcisms in the Gospels. It's not a little circus sideshow to show everybody he's divine. He's there on a mission. And a lot of that mission is, as his mother predicts, he's casting down the mighty from their thrones
Hmm.
and exalting those of low degree. So he's there driving out the dark powers because he's reestablishing his kingdom. They've been usurpers that are controlling individual people and whole nations through idolatry and so forth. And he's there to kind of push them out and to say, as he says at the end of his earthly ministry, all authority in heaven and earth has been given to me, which is a weird thing to say. It's like, well, what did he say that about? Unless you understand the context, which is, okay, there are a bunch of usurpers here, and I have cleaned them out. but there's more work to do. And so you, apostles, go therefore into all the world, and now you're going to continue this work that I've been doing, and you're going to cast out demons, you're going to heal people, you're going to do all this stuff. So a lot of what the Bible is about is a massive spiritual war that's going on that Christ is winning and has won, but it has not been brought to its total completion yet. The metaphor that I think or simile that works is D-Day during World War II. D-Day is the day at which World War II was decided, but it's not the day the fighting stopped.
Yeah. Yeah.
Fighting continued, and so that's what Christianity in this time and space is about.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, to the question of how vulnerable are Jesus followers to demonic powers, then maybe we could say we are vulnerable to demonic oppression because that's what they're trying to do. But we're not just blatantly wide open vulnerable for demon possession. Right. Of that, you have to be a willing participant.
That's right. If you are following Jesus, if you are living that faithfulness, not just I have this as an identity, but I am living faithfully, then no, you cannot be demon possessed.
Yeah.
A good question that I would add also to this, because sometimes when I tell people about this, they're like, well, then why does God allow this to begin with?
Yeah, right.
Why God? Like, come on. Life is hard enough as it is.
Right.
So there are answers for this. And one of the keys is in that experience that I mentioned with St. Paul. It is not that St. Paul had some grievous sin. It doesn't mention that God is punishing him for, but he's experiencing this and God is giving him grace in the midst of it. So one of I mentioned Jubilees earlier, and Jubilees actually has an explanation for why there are demons present in the world. It's very, very direct. And it's not because someone says the reason demons are present in the world is X, Y, and Z. It's rather told in terms of narrative. And so the narrative is that the flood destroys all of the giants, right? And so these are hybrids, these unclean humans. And so they're all dead. They are dead, but their spirits still exist, even though their bodies have been killed. And the spirits begin to attack Noah and his sons. And Noah says to God in this, like, hello, I thought the flood was sent to deal with this problem, and they're still here, and they're still attacking us, and what's going on? And so God, I'm paraphrasing here a little bit. God essentially says, okay, Noah, you're right. I'm going to open up the abyss, and I'm going to dump them all into the abyss, and you'll never hear from them again. And right as God is about to do this, one of these spirits, a guy named Mastema, steps forward and says, hold on a second, God. I'd like to strike a deal. And God says, okay, I'm listening. And he says, look, if you let 10% of me and my boys stay here on earth, you can send the other 90% into the abyss. Who cares about them anyway? If you let 10% of us stay on earth, then we promise that we will only afflict sinners. We will afflict only the wicked. And we'll leave everybody else alone. The righteous will be left alone. And God says, okay, it's a deal, but you're still going into the abyss when the time comes. When the time comes. And so this is the explanation that's given for the presence of unclean spirits in the book of Jubilees. Again, I'm not saying it's dogma, but it is representing what people at that time and place believed. Mm-hmm. And so the idea is that they attack the wicked. Why? They attack the wicked. They attack human beings because that's what they like to do, right? That's who they are. Why would God permit it? The reason that God permits it is to bring sinners to repentance. Mm. Because we don't tend to repent if things are great. We tend to repent only if we're suffering. And so all of the suffering in the world traditionally is attached to demonic forces. That doesn't mean there aren't viruses and bacteria and earthquakes and whatever, but that it's understood that spiritual forces are also part of what's going on here. Like you could say, okay, yes, COVID was caused by a virus and we can pinpoint where it started, whatever. But you also need to ask the question as a Christian, like, why did God permit that? Why did that happen in the world? What's going on? And it did have a demonic force. Everyone experienced that. It was a demonic force at loose in the world, right? And so in St. Paul's case, it's not because he's this horrible, horrible sinner and God is saying, Paul, you better repent. It's that repentance is not just about turning your back on sin. It's actually about increasing your faithfulness to Christ.
Mm,
And so what St. Paul is being given was the opportunity to to crank it up,
mm.
to function at an even higher level. He's a holy man. You're going to be even holier. So, the interesting that St. Paul often uses the imagery of athletics in his
Yeah.
epistles.
Yep.
And if anyone's ever trained as an athlete, or even if you're just kind of someone like me who goes to the gym trying to stave off middle age, you know that it is not the most comfortable thing in the world, especially at the start. It's not comfortable. There's some suffering, there's some pain involved. It's not what you prefer to do. Like I would prefer to sit on my couch and eat the best food forever, but that's actually not good for me. I need to engage in what in the ancient world would have been called ascesis, asceticism. That word ascesis did not refer originally to religious striving. It referred to athletic training. Like I'm an athlete, I train, right? Engage in some of that, and that can then makes me stronger and faster and more stamina and so forth. And that is what's going on with the presence of demons in this world. So they are there, of course, for those who are really drowning in sin. They are there to motivate them to come out of that. But for those who are living faithfully, it's to motivate them to increase their faithfulness.
Mm.
So that's why it's permitted still in this world that we be attacked by demonic powers. Not comfortable, but the truth is that you don't work out unless it hurts.
Yeah. So we're coming to the close, and so I want to end on a light note
Okay.
because this is something I know that you have already addressed elsewhere. But in getting ready for these conversations, I have heard from several families in my church about K-pop demon hunters. And I'd love to know, with all of your study of the unseen realm, how do you evaluate K-pop demon hunters?
Okay. Well, the first thing I'll say is see my YouTube channel because my friend Michael Lensman and I just did a whole episode of the Areopagus podcast
I love
talking
it.
about this movie for like an
Perfect.
hour and a half.
Perfect. I'll link that in the episode notes.
So I'll say that. But the next thing I'll say is like, if you think about all I just said about demonization,
Yeah.
it's all in that movie. And it's funny, I didn't watch that movie initially when it came out because I was like, I don't like K-pop. I don't, what is this stuff? But my wife, God bless her, my wife said to me over and over again, you must watch this film. This is all this stuff that you're talking about all the time. And I was like, is it though? And then finally, enough people said it to me that it made me heed my wife. And I sat down and I didn't let anybody know that I was doing this. I was embarrassed by this
Like
point.
in secret watching it.
Yes, I secretly watched this film 4 times over the space of 5 days. The first time it was like, okay, I'm going to watch this now because, my friend wants to do a podcast episode on this, so I need to have watched it. And then the second time I watched, I was like, okay, I'm watching it more closely now. This is research, whatever. And then by the third time, any pretense was completely gone. It was like, I love this movie so much. This is so fun. I cannot get enough. And then the fourth time I was like, well, I'm not doing anything. I might as well watch this movie that I love so much. And now I've even watched it a fifth time since then, all in the space of about maybe 3 or 4 weeks. So yes, I do love this movie. It's not just because it's super fun and just so well put together. And as they say, the soundtrack is a banger.
Yeah.
But so much that is in this film is exactly about this. So the main character Rumi, she seems to be conceived like a giant, maybe hard to
Yeah.
tell. She has some kind of demon human hybrid background, and yet she is redeemable. She's not simply, that's the thing about these unclean persons is that there's the possibility for repentance, right? The ones that we hear about, the ones who don't repent, but they are human, and so every human has a possibility for repentance as long as they're in this life. So the possibility of repentant giants is totally a thing. But
Mm.
so Rumi, the vehicle through which her demonization increases is her not just shame, which is the word that's used a lot in the movie, but also lying about what she's ashamed of.
Mm.
She's lying
Mm.
to her friends and hiding from her friends and rejecting communion with her friends. They want to go and hang out with her at the bathhouse to hang out and relax and whatever. And she's like, oh, you guys go ahead. She's rejecting them over and over and over again. Right. So it's not just she has this background, that she's ashamed of, she's rejecting them and rejecting communion with them. And then she meets someone else who is basically a completely demonized human named Genu, who is the leader of the Saja Boys, this demon boy band, right? And he's
Right.
completely gone. He's literally serving basically the devil, who is depicted as a gigantic mouth that swallows souls, which
Huh.
is straight out of Christian tradition. Now, it
Yeah.
may be out of Korean tradition as well, because the image of a mouth that swallows souls is everywhere in paganism too. Everywhere. The Lord of the Underworld is often described as being a gigantic mouth. Don't get near it, right? So like when Baal is talking to his emissaries about, he wants to conquer the underworld. He's like, don't get near Moat's mouth. He might eat you. That's in the Baal text, right? Anyway, yeah. So Genu is literally serving the Lord of all the demons, basically the devil himself, and and his shame is the means by which he's being controlled by the devil. But it's also based on a real sin, which is that he abandons his family for his own comfort in the film. Yeah,
Mm.
spoiler alert, everybody, by the way. But everyone should have
Yeah.
watched this movie at least 5 times by now, as I have. So, but then these two characters meet each other and they begin to confess their darkness to each other and confess their lies to each other. And they both begin to experience healing as a result. Rumi's voice begins to return to back to what it should be. And Gino at one point actually no longer hears the devil talking to him,
Mm.
you know? And then the final way that all of this is healed is that Rumi confesses to her friends, returns back to the communion that they have. Genu himself confesses everything that because he kind of only lets out a little bit at a time what he is that he did. He confesses everything at the end and says, I'm sorry. So he actually expresses repentance in words and then sacrifices himself to save Rumi from the devil,
Mm.
right? And then the kind of the consummation of the film is when the three heroines who hold off demons by means of ritual magic and music, basically. Um, when they are all kind of brought together and they function again in harmony. And this is a thing that I think a lot of the analyses I've heard and read miss. Initially in the film, whenever they are about to encounter their fans in person, they hide from them. They hide from them. They prefer them to be on the other side of a screen or just, they're singing a concert, they're down in the
Mm.
stands, whatever. In the last scenes of the film, they actually meet some of their fans directly, no security guards, no one hiding, and they directly talk to them and have this conversation with them and meet with them.
Mm.
And
Mm.
so the film ultimately is about communion and people being transparent to one another. I've seen some people saying that this is like a big coming out story, but I'm like, it's not about that because yeah, number one, the world still does not know about Rumi's ancestry. They have no idea what that's about. This is revealed to her friends, and we don't know exactly the story there. Her father's a demon. What does that mean exactly? Was her father a demonized human? That's my theory. I don't know for sure, but in any event, yeah, it's about not kind of trusting in your own individual power, but rather this harmony with your friends and living in communion and self-sacrifice. And this is the means by which evil is defeated in the film.
Mm.
So I'm not going to say it's a Christian film, but it is absolutely a film that is ripe for Christian interpretation. Is the way I see it. And the truth is, I've literally been fanboying this film now for a few weeks now. And so I've watched all kinds of interviews with people who made it, and there are lots and lots of Christians involved in making this film. Lots
Huh.
of
Huh.
Christians,
Huh.
because of course, as we all
Interesting.
know, this film is very much a Korean movie. Like lots of Koreans made
Hmm.
this movie. Many of them have mentioned that they are Christians, and Koreans, like in Korea, in South Korea, about a third of the population is Christian, and then the Korean diaspora is about 70% Christian. So if you meet a Korean, especially in the West, chances are that person's a Christian, and more likely than not, probably Presbyterian. But yeah, so there's a lot of Christians who made this movie. A lot of Christians who made this movie,
Yeah.
and I'm not saying that they necessarily programmed that in, but at least, for instance, the main songwriter EJ, who is the voice of Rumi, and oh my gosh, what a voice this young woman has! Oh my gosh, incredible voice this woman has. She at one point when she wrote the song Your Idol, right, which is the last sort of seductive song that the Saja Boys, the demon boy band, sing, she said that she drew on her Christian upbringing to represent idolatry in that
Mm.
song, which is an interesting thing to do. It's an interesting comment because K-pop stars are referred to as idols. So she's actually
Right.
critiquing that world
Mm.
by giving it this particular spin. So, yes, uh, yeah, fun movie and a great opportunity to explain a lot of weird spiritual stuff, which is Christian, to people that maybe are not familiar with it. So I'm glad you asked because, as you can tell, I'm kind of a fanboy for the film now.
I haven't seen it yet, but I am going to see it because I have a 10-year-old who wants to have a conversation about it. And I'm so excited. Like, what a privilege to be able to hang out and talk about those things with a 10-year-old. I'm so excited about the whole
Yes.
thing. But thank you for your thoughts
Yeah,
about that.
absolutely.
Yeah. And thank you for your time. Again, I know you're crazy busy with all the media and the book writing and all the things that you're doing. There's a wealth of knowledge here. So I'm just going to push people towards a lot of the projects that you've already done. But thank
Thank
you
you.
for kind of giving us some handholds as we
Absolutely.
begin the conversation about the unseen realm. Thank you so much.
Thank God.